Hi, my name is Olivia Hart. When I was 16, my parents threw me out of the house with only $12 in my pocket and a trash bag full of clothes. It was raining that night, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I remember standing on the porch, knocking on the door, begging them to let me stay just for one more night. But no one opened. Behind those walls were the voices that once called me family. 10 years later, I stood at the gate of my $850,000 home in Seattle, the house I built from nothing, and watched the same people who had shut that door now plead for a place to stay. They said they had nowhere else to go. They said, family never gives up on each other. I just smiled. Because sometimes, silence is the only answer left. Have you ever been forced to choose between forgiveness and self-respect? And where are you watching from today? I'd truly love to hear your story in the comments. Thank you so much. I was born and raised in the southern suburbs of Denver, where every house looked almost identical, white fences lined the streets, and everyone lived for one thing: reputation. My father, Mark Hart, was a civil engineer, a man who believed that honor was something that could never be tarnished, even if it meant sacrificing love. My mother, Janet, was the kind of woman neighbors admired, always dressed perfectly, her smile meticulously polite, and her faith unshakable that having a perfect family was the only ticket into the upper circle of our neighborhood. In that picture, my brother Logan was the brightest color, the pride of the entire Hart family. He played football for school, earned a sports scholarship, and was the subject of every dinner conversation. And then there was me, Olivia, the second child, who loved painting, reading, and spending hours just watching how the light changed through the trees. I did well in school, even won a state art award, but in their eyes, I was always the dreamer, the unrealistic one. My mother often told me, "You can paint the whole world, Olivia, but how will painting buy you a house?" That sentence stuck in my heart like a thorn since I was 12 years old. My father was strict, sometimes to the point of coldness. He believed that too much affection would make a child weak. So instead of praise, I received words like, "Don't get proud, everything you have comes from your parents' genes." I tried so hard, studied harder, behaved better, even tried to act like Logan just to see that same proud look in their eyes when they looked at him. But somehow, the harder I tried, the more invisible I became. Logan was called the pride of the family. And I, as my mother once muttered during dinner when she thought I couldn't hear, was the project that never quite worked out. I remember sitting there in silence, my hand gripping the spoon until it turned cold, forcing down food that had lost all taste. That sentence carved a mark inside me that never faded. Logan wasn't cruel, but he grew up in a world where every mistake he made was easily forgiven. When Logan broke the neighbor's car window, my father just laughed and said, "That's what a strong boy looks like." But when I accidentally spilled a glass of water on the dinner table, my mother sighed, "Olivia, you're so clumsy and careless." Favoritism doesn't always come from grand gestures. It's born from 1,000 tiny cuts, each small enough to go unnoticed, but deep enough to make a child's heart bleed. That was when I began to understand that in our house, love came with conditions. And that condition was simple. You had to make them proud. I tried to prove I was worth something. I joined the art club, won my first portrait drawing award, and ran home beaming, holding the certificate still warm with the scent of ink. My mother glanced at it, folded it neatly, and placed it on the kitchen counter. "Good job. Now help me tidy the living room." Logan's bringing his friends over. In that moment, everything inside me crumbled in a single breath. I realized that in that house, not all achievements mattered, only the ones they deemed useful. When Logan made mistakes, everyone found reasons to defend him. When I said something they didn't like, I was told I was disrespectful and ungrateful. And I, the little girl who once believed that effort could earn love, slowly learned the art of silence. Every night, I sat in my small room, listening to the sound of the TV downstairs, the cheers and applause as Logan played his games. The whole family celebrated while I quietly sketched that moment, not to remember it, but to soothe the ache of being forgotten. Sometimes, I wondered if there was something inherently wrong with me. Was I truly not good enough to be loved? My mother once said, if you want to be loved, do something worthy of love. I believed that for years. I kept trying to become the daughter worthy of a love that never came. But the harder I tried, the more I felt like a shadow in someone else's story. And it was in those years that a silent promise began to form inside me. One day, I would leave that house. I would build a place of my own, a place where love didn't have to be earned. What I didn't know then was that day would come sooner than I ever imagined. I still remember that night vividly, a freezing autumn night when the wind brushed through the trees outside my window, making the glass panes tremble softly. I was sitting in my room, lost in an unfinished sketch under the warm glow of a yellow lamp. The smell of paint and paper mixed with the sound of the TV downstairs, where my parents were watching the news, and Logan had just come home from a teammate's birthday party. I heard his laughter, the faint jingle of coins in his jacket pocket, and then, only a few minutes later, the calm was shattered by my mother's scream from the living room. "Where's my money? Who took $500 from my purse?" Her footsteps pounded across the wooden floor and stopped right outside my door. The door burst open so hard that the canvas I was working on fell to the ground. "Olivia, you took it, didn't you, for those useless paintings of yours?" Her voice hissed through clenched teeth, her eyes burning with anger and disdain. I froze, still holding a paintbrush, my fingers stained with color. "What? I didn't take anything. I didn't even know you had money in your purse." She didn't listen. Her eyes darted around my room, an old wooden desk, a few cheap paint boxes, a worn-out backpack. She yanked open drawers, scattering my things everywhere, then turned to my father, who stood behind her with a face carved in stone. "I told you, all this daydreaming only leads to laziness. She must have taken it." My father was silent for a few seconds, then looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mix of disappointment and contempt. "Tell the truth, Olivia. Don't make this worse. Don't make this worse." I searched for help in Logan's eyes. He was standing by the stairs, still holding his jacket, a faint trace of alcohol in his breath. But he looked away, avoiding me completely. And in that moment, I understood I was on my own. My throat tightened. "I didn't take it. I swear." My father's voice cut through the air. "Enough. At your age and already stealing? Get out of this house and learn what honesty means." I stood frozen. My mother crossed her arms and said coldly, "Stop pretending. If you want to come back, bring the money and apologize." Logan stayed silent, and that silence hurt me more than any accusation could. I remember saying something through tears, maybe that she had misplaced the money somewhere, that her daughter would never do something so shameful. But my words fell into emptiness. My father only replied with a single dry sentence, "Stop embarrassing us any further." I ran upstairs, stuffed a few clothes into a black trash bag, and grabbed my wallet with only $10 left, the money I had saved from painting posters for a cafe near school. When I came down, my mother was already standing by the door, her face completely expressionless. "Take whatever you have. This house has no room for liars." Outside, the rain had started to pour. I gripped the trash bag tightly, looking around the house I once called home, the family photo on the wall, the couch where I used to fall asleep as a child. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe a plea, maybe an explanation, but then I realized no one wanted to listen. I stepped out onto the porch, rain slapping my face, cold and merciless. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like thunder. I stood there, soaked to the bone, waiting for anyone to open the door again. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. I knocked. "Mom, it's raining hard. Please, just let me stay for tonight. I'll leave in the morning." No response. I knocked harder, my fists blending with the sound of the rain. "Please, Mom, I'll go tomorrow. I just need one night." Inside, the lights were still on. I could see a shadow move behind the curtain. But then, nothing. No door opened. No voice answered. Only the sound of the television continued, as if I had never existed. Finally, I sank onto the steps, rain mixing with my tears. I hugged the trash bag close, struggling to breathe. A part of me still believed that my father would open the door, or my mother would come out and say, "It was just a misunderstanding." But that night, no one came. When I finally walked away from that street, my shoes soaked, my hair plastered to my face, I turned back one last time. The golden light from the window spilled across the wet pavement, glimmering as if the house itself was relieved to be free of me. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking until I saw the sign of a 24-hour cafe. I sat in a corner, shivering, my hands numb from the cold, staring at the steaming cup of coffee the kind barista had just placed in front of me. I no longer had the strength to cry. Only one sentence echoed in my head, sharp and merciless. At 16, I learned how silence can sound like applause when your own family watches you walk away. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer the daughter in their story. The espresso machine hissed, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of pastries and exhaustion. The barista, a woman with salt and pepper hair, looked at me from behind the counter. She didn't ask anything, just placed a steaming paper cup in front of me. "Drink this. You look like you're about to pass out." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the cup as if it were the last source of warmth left in the world. That night, I fell asleep on the chair, my head resting against the black trash bag filled with damp clothes. Every time the doorbell chimed, I flinched, afraid someone would tell me to leave. But no one did. Maybe because no one really saw me. The next morning, the barista returned. Her name was Mrs. Collins. She owned the cafe, a widow in her 50s, with tired but kind eyes. When she saw me still sitting there, she just sighed softly. "Do you have anywhere to go?" I shook my head, my voice trembling. "No, ma'am." She was silent for a moment, then said, "If you really want to work, I can let you wash dishes. But if you're just looking to hide, I'll have to ask you to leave." I nodded, clinging to her words like a drowning person grabbing the last piece of driftwood. From that day on, I started washing dishes, wiping tables, taking out the trash, doing anything that needed to be done in that small cafe. My hands cracked from the cold water, my fingertips wrinkled from scrubbing hundreds of cups a day. But at least, I had a roof over my head. Mrs. Collins let me sleep in the storage room, surrounded by sacks of coffee beans and boxes of sugar. At first, I only had a thin blanket and an old pillow. But after a few weeks, she brought in a small mattress and said softly, "You deserve to sleep on something softer than the floor." I couldn't find the words to thank her, only tears. As time went by, I started learning how to make coffee. Mrs. Collins told me, making coffee isn't just a job, it's the art of patience. I studied carefully every ratio of water, every grind size of the beans. Under the cafe's warm yellow light, I slowly began to fear less. On quiet nights, when there were no customers, I would sit by the window and sketch the silhouettes of people passing by in my small notebook. When Mrs. Collins asked why I loved to draw, I answered softly, "Because it's the only thing I can control. Even if the whole world turns its back on me, I can still draw it the way I want it to be." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Never let anyone make you believe you're not worthy, Olivia. Not even your family." I didn't respond, but that sentence stayed with me for years. During the day, I worked at the cafe. At night, I attended adult education classes nearby to earn my GED, the equivalent of a high school diploma. There were nights when I was so exhausted that I fell asleep at my desk, but every morning, I still woke up at 5 to open the cafe. Each time I looked into the small bathroom mirror behind the shop, I saw a thin face, dark circles under my eyes, but there was also a light I'd never seen before. The light of someone trying to live. I was no longer the abandoned daughter. I was a girl starting over from zero. Every night before sleeping, I whispered like a prayer, "One day, I'll build a home that no one can throw me out of." 2 years later, I turned 18. I had saved over $2,000, not much, but it was everything I had in the world. I held my GED certificate in my trembling hands, almost dropping it as I stepped out of the testing center. Mrs. Collins hugged me, her eyes glistening. I always knew you'd make it, she said. I used that money to enroll in an interior design program at Seattle Community College. It was the first time I dared to dream about the future. In my mind, there was no longer the image of that old house in Denver, only sketches of new spaces where light and peace could coexist. The day I left Denver, it was raining again, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I carried an old suitcase, a worn sketchbook, and a one-way bus ticket to Seattle. Mrs. Collins walked me all the way to the station and handed me a thermos of warm coffee. "Seattle's cold," she said. "Drink this so you don't miss home too much." I smiled faintly. "I don't have a home, ma'am." She rested her hand on my shoulder, gentle as a hug. "Then go build a place you can call home, Olivia, and don't come back until you do." As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window and saw her figure growing smaller in the rain. A mix of gratitude and loss rose inside me. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. And even though my wallet held only a few crumpled bills, I knew I was richer than ever because I had faith and a dream big enough to keep me alive. Seattle welcomed me with heavy rain and the rich scent of coffee in the air, the kind that reminded me of Mrs. Collins every time I passed a small cafe along the street. I rented a tiny room on the second floor of an old house in Fremont. The walls were peeling, the ceiling was low, and whenever the wind blew, the window frames let out soft whistling sounds, almost like breathing. But, to me, it was the first safe place I could truly call mine. I repainted the walls, hung a few of my own paintings, and placed a small potted plant by the window. It was a poor little room, but it was full of life because it was built by my own hands. During the day, I attended interior design classes at Seattle Community College. At night, I worked part-time for a local decor company called Harper & Clay Design. At first, I only did small tasks, making coffee, cutting sample papers, organizing the storage room. But I quietly observed everything. How they balanced color and light, how an old space could be transformed into somewhere people wanted to stay. I began to understand that design wasn't just about beauty, it was the art of healing spaces, and in a way, healing oneself. One day, my boss, Mrs. Harper, noticed a sketch I had left on the table and called me over. "Did you draw this?" she asked. Startled, I nodded. She studied it carefully, then smiled. "You have a different eye. You might not realize it yet, but this is exactly what Seattle clients are looking for: authenticity in every line." From then on, I was given small projects, a living room in the suburbs, an old apartment that needed to be brought back to life. I often worked late into the night, balancing study and sketches, and slowly, clients began asking for my name. Who redesigned that space? A young woman named Olivia, from Harper & Clay. I never advertised, never bragged, but word spread faster than I expected. I focused on one simple philosophy. Every space has a soul, as long as someone believes it's worth saving. 4 years later, when I graduated, I decided to leave the company and start my own journey. Everyone said I was crazy, that I was too young, had no capital, no family backing me up. But I simply smiled. I once survived with $10 and a trash bag. I'll be fine. And that's how Reframe Studio was born, a small startup based in an old garage I rented in Ballard. I painted the walls myself, designed the logo, built the website. My first clients were an elderly couple who wanted to renovate the home they had lived in for 40 years. When the project was done, the woman hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You didn't just fix our house," she said. "You helped us fall in love with life again." Those words made me believe that I had chosen the right path. Project after project followed. From worn-down apartments to forgotten houses, Reframe Studio soon became a familiar name in the local community, known for its signature style of reviving old spaces, reusing materials, preserving a home's memories, and breathing new life into them. Local media began to take notice. One morning, I received an email from Seattle Women in Business. "We'd love to interview you about your entrepreneurial journey." I read it over and over, tears welling up for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was because I still remembered that 16-year-old girl standing in the rain outside her house, and now her name was printed in a magazine. The article spread faster than I expected. People started calling me the girl who rebuilt her life by rebuilding homes. I didn't deny it. Every house I designed was a reflection of my own life, old, cracked, but still capable of becoming beautiful if given trust and care. After my first community fundraising campaign, Reframe Studio received an investment from a small fund that supported women-led startups. I spent most of the funding expanding my studio, hiring 2 employees, and developing a sustainable design branch. The work was intense, the pressure high, but for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I was truly living what freedom meant. At 25, I bought a lakeside villa near Lake Union, a historic house that had been abandoned for years. People said it was too old, too far gone, but to me, it was an opportunity to turn ruin into something extraordinary. I spent 8 months restoring every detail. The roof tiles, the stone steps, the worn wooden window frames that I chose to keep just repainted in a new shade of hope. On the day it was finished, sunlight reflected off the lake, pouring through the glass windows and filling the room with the scent of wood and the glow of greenery. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by white walls, soft light, and the quiet fragrance of pine. That house wasn't just a place to live, it was the symbol of my rebirth. I remember exactly how it felt to hold those keys in my hand. There was no one beside me, no parents to congratulate me, no flowers, no champagne. But I still laughed, a soft, quiet laugh that came from deep within. Because I knew that for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to stay. All those years of being dismissed, the nights of washing dishes until my hands bled, the dreams that had been crushed, they had all become the foundation of this home. That night, I opened the window and looked out at the still surface of the lake. The wind carried the damp scent of Seattle and faint memories of distant Denver. I lifted my cup of coffee and whispered softly, "I've built a home, Mrs. Collins. No one can throw me out anymore." And in that moment, I understood freedom doesn't come from escaping the past, but from turning pain into strength and creating something beautiful out of it. The next morning, Seattle was blanketed in fog. I was sitting in the small office of Reframe Studio, sipping coffee and reviewing a design draft for a new project when Ava, my assistant, burst in, her voice filled with excitement. "Olivia, you're on the news. The magazine reposted your interview and tagged you on Instagram. Over 10,000 shares in just a few hours." I chuckled softly, half amused, half in disbelief. I had thought that article was just a small story about rebuilding homes. I never expected it to spread that far. Hundreds of comments poured in, strangers thanking me for inspiring them. But among the congratulations, I froze when I saw a familiar comment. "Olivia Hart? Is that our Olivia?" The username read Janet H., my mother. My heart stopped for a moment. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a single word, "Mom." I stared at it, my finger hovering over the answer button for several seconds, then let it ring until it stopped. A few moments later, a text appeared. "Sweetheart, is that really you on the magazine cover? We're so proud of you." The words on the screen made my chest tighten, not from emotion, but from irony. I remembered her voice 10 years ago, cold and sharp as glass. "Get out of this house and learn to be honest." And now, that same voice had returned, sweet and gentle, as if that rainy night had never happened, as if the daughter left outside the door had never existed. I didn't respond to anyone. I just quietly went back to work. But deep down, I felt a mix of emotions, pain, a faint smile, and something that almost resembled regret. Not regret for them, but for the 16-year-old girl I once was, the girl who used to dream that one day her parents would show up and say, "We're sorry, sweetheart." But when that moment finally came, it no longer carried the weight of love. It reeked of convenience. A week passed, and I thought the storm had faded. Then one evening, as I was preparing materials for a presentation, my phone rang again. This time, it was a direct call from my mother. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Her voice was just as I remembered, smooth, controlled, with a hint of forced tremble. "Olivia, please, just listen to me. Your father and I are so happy to see how successful you've become. We're truly proud of you. But there's something we need to talk about." She paused. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "Logan and his wife are having some trouble. They're about to lose their house. Your father and I just need a place to stay for a few months until things settle down. Your house is big enough, isn't it?" I laughed, not loudly, but softly, sharply, like the sound of breaking glass. I took a deep breath and replied slowly, each word slicing through the air. "Do you remember 10 years ago when I begged to stay just one night because it was raining? Do you remember what you told me? Learn to live in the real world." "Well, Mom, I did." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, heavy and uneven, then her voice returned, trying to sound gentle. "Olivia, don't be so bitter, we're family. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes." I cut her off. "You're right. Everyone can make mistakes, but not everyone chooses to fix them by taking advantage of someone else." And then I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the lake reflect the pale glow of the moon. Inside me, there was no more anger, only a strange emptiness that lived somewhere between care and detachment. I realized that their silence all those years ago had taught me how to stand on my own, and now, their sudden concern only made me tired. In the days that followed, social media began to stir. A new account under the name Janet and Mark Hart posted a public status. "Our daughter is famous now, but she's forgotten her family. We asked only for a little kindness and were met with coldness." Dozens of relatives chimed in. Some scolded me for being ungrateful, saying I had forgotten my roots after success. Others sent anonymous messages, telling me I should be ashamed. I read them all. Each word felt like a blade, but, strangely, it no longer cut deep. I thought back to when I was 16, to the rain, the unanswered knocking, and the words, "The real world will teach you." And now I wanted to tell them, yes, the real world did teach me. And the first lesson was this: kindness should never be taken advantage of. I didn't respond, I didn't write a statement, I simply kept working. But, deep down, I began to prepare myself because I knew they wouldn't stop there. When people who once abandoned you realize you now have something they want, they'll use every weapon they can: guilt, manipulation, even playing the victim. That night, I received an email from an old classmate in Denver. "Liv, your parents are telling everyone that you're ungrateful, that your wealth came from some kind of settlement money. They're saying you didn't actually build your company, that back then you were into drugs and ran away with some guy. They say they tried to find you, but you refused to come home." I sat in front of my laptop for a long time, the blue light washing over my face in the silence of the room, where even the ticking of the clock felt loud. The comments online kept multiplying, some accusing me of being too cold-hearted, others claiming money has made her heartless. But none of them knew what had really happened. I could stay silent again, let it all pass like before. But this time, it wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming the truth. I opened a new email. The list of recipients stretched long: Aunt Mary, Uncle Robert, Aunt Susan, my cousin Jake, and even relatives in Denver I hadn't spoken to in nearly 10 years. I stared at that list, a row of names belonging to people who had all turned their backs when I needed them most. Then, I began to type. "To everyone who still remembers me as Olivia Hart, the girl you once called the disgrace who ran away with some guy." I paused, took a deep breath, and let my fingers follow the memories. I wrote about that rainy night when my parents accused me of stealing $500 and threw me out with $10 in my pocket and a black trash bag in my hand. I told them how I knocked on the door, begging to stay just one night, but no one opened. I described the nights I spent in a 24-hour cafe, the widow who owned it and offered me dishwashing work, the way she taught me to make coffee, and how I learned to survive, to study on my own, and to earn my GED. I told them about the years I spent washing dishes, sleeping in a storage room, working nonstop just to afford Seattle Community College, and how I eventually built Reframe Studio with my own hands. Every word I wrote was calm without anger, without accusation but soaked in truth, the truth they had twisted for a decade. I didn't curse, I didn't blame. I simply told the story as someone who had climbed back up after being thrown to the bottom. At the end of the email, I attached a photo file. It was a screenshot of messages between Logan and one of his old friends, sent to me a few months ago by that same friend, now a father himself, after reading my magazine interview. The message read, "Don't worry, man, just blame her. Mom and Dad will believe me anyway." I remember staring at that line for a long time, tears falling before I even realized. Not because it hurt anymore, but because at last, everything made sense. In the email, I added, "I'm not sharing this to shame anyone. I just want those who believed the lies to know that I didn't leave out of rebellion. I wasn't an addict, and I didn't betray anyone. I was thrown out. I don't need pity. I just want the truth to be known." I read the entire letter one last time. It was nearly 7 pages long, but not a single word felt unnecessary. Before pressing send, I typed one final line. "Sometimes, silence is how we survive. But today, I choose to speak not for revenge, but for closure." I hit send at 2 in the morning. In the quiet of my room, the soft whoosh of the email leaving my outbox sounded like a release. I turned off my laptop, sat still, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt my heart grow lighter. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My inbox overflowed with replies. Some wrote simply, "I didn't know, Olivia, I'm truly sorry." Others deflected, "What's the point of bringing this up now?" A few admitted, "We just believed what your parents told us, we never imagined." I read every message without anger, without resentment. Some apologized, but I didn't reply. Some avoided responsibility, but I didn't need their excuses. What I wanted was never sympathy, it was truth. And now, it was out in the open. 3 days later, my email spread beyond the family circle. A distant relative shared it online, and it went viral faster than my magazine interview ever had. People began calling it the letter of the forgotten daughter. Thousands of comments poured in, most of them supportive. Many shared their own stories of being abandoned by their families. One woman wrote, "Thank you for speaking for all the children who were cast aside." I read every word, my chest tightening with emotion. I realized then I wasn't the only one who had ever been thrown out for not fitting into a parent's perfect picture. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. The moment I heard the voice on the other end, I knew who it was. Logan. His voice was hoarse, mixed with heavy breathing. "You happy now? You've turned my whole family into a joke." I paused for a few seconds before replying calmly. "No, Logan, I didn't turn anyone into anything. I just brought light to the places you all tried to keep in the dark." Then, I hung up. After that call, I stepped out onto the balcony and watched the city lights shimmer across the surface of the lake. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't the thrill of victory, it was the quiet relief of finally being able to breathe after years of holding it all in. I didn't need their love. I only needed them to know that I existed and that I had lived rightly, no matter what they had said about me. 3 days after the email spread everywhere, my phone started buzzing nonstop again. But this time, it wasn't apologies or messages of support, it was a flood of frantic texts from an unfamiliar Denver area code. The first one came in the middle of the night. "Olivia, can we talk? It's Emily, Logan's wife." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I had never meant to drag her into this, but maybe that was no longer possible. The next morning, I replied briefly, "I have nothing more to say about the past, Emily. But if you want the truth, ask." Almost immediately, another message appeared, longer this time. "I read your letter, and the messages between Logan and his friend. I can't believe it. I'm pregnant, Olivia. He told me you ran away with a guy, that you were on drugs and stole from your parents." I believed him, he sounded so certain. Now I understand why he always panicked whenever someone mentioned your name. "Thank you. Now I see everything." I set my phone down and sat quietly. There was no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, just a deep, quiet sadness. Sadness for Emily, for the unborn child, and for Logan, who still didn't know how to live honestly with himself. I finally typed a short reply. Take care of yourself, Emily. Don't let that child grow up in fear. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. A few days later, word came from Denver. Emily had left home, carrying her luggage and divorce papers. A relative of hers told me that as she walked out the door, Logan shouted after her, insisting that I had poisoned her mind. But Emily's voice was calm when she answered, "No, Olivia didn't poison me. She just opened the door. You're the one who let the light in." That story spread like wildfire through dry grass. The people who once praised Logan, the former football star, the Golden Son, now avoided even mentioning his name. The company he worked for began receiving anonymous emails accusing him of deceit and abuse of power. Within 2 weeks, Logan was suspended and placed under internal investigation. And it had all started with a story he once thought would stay buried forever. One afternoon, just after I finished a meeting with a client, the receptionist came rushing toward me, her voice trembling. "Miss Olivia, there's a man causing a scene downstairs. He's drunk and says he's your brother." My heart stilled for a moment, but I wasn't surprised. I walked slowly down to the lobby. Under the bright glass atrium of Reframe Studio, Logan stood there, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, reeking of alcohol. Everyone watched him, a mix of curiosity and discomfort on their faces. When he saw me, he pointed a shaking finger and shouted, his voice rough and broken. "You think you're better than everyone, Olivia? You think you're so righteous? You're just lucky. Without other people helping you, you'd still be that freeloading girl washing dishes in a coffee shop." I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the man in front of me, the brother who had once been my parents' pride, now just a distorted shadow of who he used to be. The confidence in his eyes was gone, replaced by bitterness and the fear of being forgotten. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and steady, as if I had been waiting 10 years to say it. "No, Logan, I'm not better than anyone, I just don't lie." The entire lobby went silent. I could hear his heavy breathing, the faint sound of rain starting to hit the glass windows. Logan let out a trembling, bitter laugh. "You destroyed this family just to prove you were right?" I answered softly, barely louder than a breath. "No, I didn't destroy anything. I just pulled the curtain off a dark room. You're the one who chose to stay inside." The security guard approached quietly. "Miss Hart, would you like us to escort him out?" I nodded, my eyes never leaving Logan. He struggled, shouting a few more incoherent words before being dragged out of the building. The sound of the glass door closing behind him felt like a final period at the end of a long sentence. I stood there, watching, no longer angry, no longer sad, just filled with a strange emptiness. It was like looking at a statue that had once been grand, now reduced to broken fragments buried in dust. When he was gone, Ava came up beside me and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, better than ever." I turned toward the window. Rain was falling heavily now, sliding down the glass in long streaks, catching the warm light from the lobby inside. And in that moment, a quiet peace settled over me, a calm that told me one final meeting still needed to happen. They arrived on a cloudy afternoon in Seattle, when the lake outside looked like a sheet of gray glass, and the wind carried a chill from the water. Ava came in to tell me I had family visitors waiting at the gate. I already knew who they were before I even checked the camera feed. Mark and Janet, standing close together in dark coats, their faces thinner, older than I remembered. I went out and opened the gate. Their steps faltered at the wooden porch, the same one I had sanded and varnished myself. I thought of all those childhood moments when I wasn't allowed to touch anything expensive in our house, and realized that now, everything here had been built by my own hands. My mother looked around and swallowed hard. "The house, it's beautiful, Olivia." My father straightened his back, trying to hold on to the composure of a man who once commanded concrete and steel. I came to apologize," he said. "I didn't invite them in. I just stepped aside, letting the wind and silence pass between us. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling, almost afraid of itself. She told me about the sleepless nights, about the apartment being repossessed by the bank, about Logan losing his job and Emily leaving. About the mornings when she opened the kitchen cupboard and suddenly remembered the daughter she had left crying on the porch in the rain. I was wrong, she said, eyes downcast. Back then, I was so afraid of the neighbors, of reputation, of everything, except losing you. My father cleared his throat, his words coming out in uneven fragments. I thought I was teaching you discipline. I thought toughness was love. But I didn't know the difference between discipline and cruelty. They talked, they pleaded, they hoped for a chance to make things right. I listened quietly, noticing how the wind stirred the small chime hanging from the porch. Its soft ringing, more honest than any apology. I didn't feel my heart soften, nor did it harden into stone. I simply felt clear in a way I hadn't been in years. Clear. Like the day I first held the keys to this house and knew I would never stand outside a closed door again. I spoke slowly, careful that each word told the truth without cruelty. Thank you for coming, and for saying you're sorry. I believe an apology is a good start. But this house, it no longer has room for lies or emotional debt. Every room here is already occupied by peace, by silence, and by self-respect, and they don't like to be disturbed. All. My mother lifted her eyes, her lips trembling. Olivia, can't you give me just one day, one meal, one long conversation? I looked straight at her. On that rainy night, I asked for just one night too. You didn't open the door. Today, I open the door for myself with boundaries. I forgive you. But I won't live again in a room built on conditions. My father exhaled, his shoulders slumping like a bridge that had miscalculated its weight. I understand. At least, thank you for listening. I nodded and walked them to the gate. There were no hugs, no family photos, just the quiet click of the gate closing and the two of them fading into the misty hill beyond. I stood there for a long time, not happy, not sad, just aware that an old wound had finally been bandaged the right way, clean, dry, and no longer bleeding. That night, I didn't sleep. I made a pour over the way Mrs. Collins had once taught me, boil the water, let it rest for 30 seconds, pour in slow, steady circles. The scent of coffee rose, carrying memories back to that small street in Denver, to the sound of the cafe's door chime, and a 16-year-old girl clutching a paper cup like it was a fireplace. The next morning, I booked a flight. No announcement, no companion. I simply left a note on the studio board. Out of town for a few days, take care of the plants as you would a friend. As the plane broke through the clouds and began its descent, the golden plains of Colorado spread beneath the sunlight, steady, quiet, familiar. I went straight to the same 24-hour cafe. The door was still open. The sign had faded, but the scent of espresso and brown sugar was exactly the same as the days I hid from the cold in the back storage room. Mrs. Collins was wiping down the counter, wearing the same striped apron, now worn thin, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun. I stood at the doorway for a long moment, saying nothing, just watching the lines at the corners of her eyes, the most beautiful thing time had ever left behind. She looked up, froze for a heartbeat, and then her eyes lit up as though a light had just been switched on. Olivia? I walked forward and hugged her. No words were needed, everything found its place on its own. We sat by the window, the very spot where I once slept, curled up beside a black trash bag. She made me a cup of coffee with the same old recipe, and as she set it down, she scolded gently. My grown-up girl didn't even bother to warn me she was coming. I laughed. I wanted to see you right where you saved me. We talked for hours about the studio, the lakeside house, the magazine article, the letter to my relatives, Logan's downfall, and the final visit that closed the door on the past. When I told her about my parents' apology, she stayed silent for a long while. Then she placed her hand over mine and gave a light squeeze. Forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door to the same storm again, she said softly. You did the right thing. I looked around the cafe. The same wooden chairs that once creaked beneath me had grown older too, but they were clean and sturdy, just like her. And then I told her what I had been thinking since the plane left Seattle. Mrs. Collins, I have a house now with plenty of rooms. But I only want to fill it with people who are truly family. Will you be my godmother? I want to make a deal with you, no lawyers, just love. Every morning, I'll make the coffee. Every afternoon, you'll remind me to rest. And every season, we'll plant another patch of flowers together. Her hand trembled, and her eyes glistened like the surface of Lake Union on a sunny day. I've thought of you as my daughter since the first night you slept in the storage room, she said. But if you want a name for it, then yes, it's family. She smiled, that gentle smile that folded her wrinkles into the shape of tiny wings. A godmother? I'd be honored, my girl. I hugged her again, and in that embrace, I felt every version of myself 16, 18, 25 all sit quietly together inside my chest, finally at peace. A few weeks later, Seattle welcomed a new resident. I set up a garden view room for Mrs. Collins, one where the morning sun touched the edge of her bed and the afternoon carried the sound of rippling water through the window. We created a small corner in the kitchen just for her coffee tools. The gooseneck kettle, the scale, the paper filters, and the wooden box of beans. She said, a house that smells like coffee never feels lonely. I added, and a house that echoes with laughter leaves no path for the past to return. 1. On the day she moved in, I hung a small wooden sign by the porch that read, Home, Brewed Daily. It was our private joke. Every morning, she sat on the steps with a book while I watered the flowers. Every evening, I took her for walks along the lake, pointing out the homes I had redesigned, houses that had once known pain but now remembered how to smile. Sometimes she'd remind me in her familiar, gentle tone. Slow down by half a heartbeat, and you'll hear your own heart. And I did. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't running anymore. News about my parents came now and then, drifting in like dry autumn leaves. They had moved to a small town, living quietly, rarely appearing online. They no longer wrote about me, perhaps because they had finally learned that silence, at the right time, is also a form of respect. I never reached out, but I never blocked them either. Between us stood a broken bridge. I didn't rebuild it, but I planted flowers on my side. One night, as Mrs. Collins and I sat watching the rain, she asked softly, "What if they really do change one day?" I smiled. "Then when they plant peace on their side of the river, I'll send a bouquet across, not to return, but to celebrate." She nodded, refilling our cups. The scent of coffee rose, blending with the sound of rain like an unspoken melody. I know most people wish stories like mine ended with a warm family hug under the same old roof. But real life doesn't always choose perfect endings. Sometimes, it chooses the right one. I chose family in the only way I could truly belong. A godmother who once gave me a mattress in a storage room and now gives me peace in her kitchen. A garden of white roses replanted each year. A house full of light whose door opens from love, not fear. I was once the girl standing outside, learning to read the language of silence. Today, I am the woman who has learned to speak through kind boundaries. And between those two versions of me, one thing has never changed. I don't lie to myself. To you, the one who stayed with me until the very last line. If you've ever had to choose between forgiveness and self-respect, remember this: boundaries are a form of love, and that love begins with yourself. If you've ever been called extra or unnecessary, know that no one is a leftover in life. Maybe you just haven't stepped into the room meant for you yet. Find the people who truly see you. They may not share your blood, but they speak the same language of the heart. Build a home where love isn't conditional, where truth doesn't have to whisper, and where each year you plant something new to remind yourself that you survived. Not everyone who leaves is a loss. Sometimes, their absence is the space you needed to find everything. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you again in the next stories that shine and come to life every day on Familial Stories Exposed.